The hand connected with her arm, fingers biting into the soft flesh above her elbow. The grip was not merely tight, it was proprietary. It was the grip of a man who believed he was reclaiming a misplaced object. Dr. Marcus Dane did not see Alara Vance, the most competent charge nurse on the oncology ward. He saw an extension of his will, a line item on his personal balance sheet that had dared to move itself into the liabilities column. The sound of it, a sharp, fleshy slap of palm against her uniform, was swallowed by the cavernous quiet of the hospital corridor at midnight. But the silence that followed was louder. It was a weighted silence, filled with the things a dozen other nurses and 3 orderlies were pretending not to see. "You are making a scene, Marcus," she said. Her voice was low, a thread of sound in the sterile air. It did not tremble. She had spent the last 2 years learning to anchor her voice, to keep it from betraying the tectonic shifts of fear and fury happening just beneath the surface. "I am making a scene?" He laughed, a dry, ugly bark of a sound that scraped against the polished linoleum floors. "You walk out on me. You pack a single bag like some heroine in a cheap novel and disappear. You block my number. You refuse my calls at the front desk. And you have the audacity to tell me I'm making a scene?" He was a surgeon. His hands were instruments of precision, but now one of them was a blunt instrument of possession. His handsome face, the one that charmed donors and reassured patients, was twisted into a mask of petulant rage. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, an outdated file that listed her as pliant and easily intimidated. He had not updated the file. She did not scream. She did not struggle. She had learned early that struggling only tightened the grip, that screaming only fed the furnace of his anger. Instead, she focused on a point just over his shoulder, the fading light of the nurse's station, the soft green glow of a heart monitor in a nearby room. She detached. It was a skill honed over years of quiet endurance, a mental armor she wore to survive him. "Let go of my arm," she said again. The words were not a plea. They were a statement of fact, a quiet correction of a gross error. Marcus leaned in, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that was somehow more public than his shouting. "We are leaving. We are going home, and we are going to talk about your little tantrum. You have an obligation, to me, to our life." She had stayed late, not for him, never for him. She had stayed for Mr. Thorne in room 412, a man whittled down to bone and memory by a disease that had taken everything but his dignity. His family was hours away, stuck in traffic, delayed by the storm that was lashing the city. The nurses on the night shift were stretched thin. So Alara had stayed. She had clocked out and returned to his room, not as a nurse, but as a person. She held his cool, papery hand, humming a tune she didn't realize she knew, her presence a quiet anchor in the terrifying tide pulling him out to sea. He had passed just 20 minutes ago, peacefully, his last exhale a gentle sigh. She had been closing his eyes, a final act of service, when the call had come from the front desk that Marcus was there, demanding to see her. Now, in the hallway, the peace of that quiet room felt a universe away. Marcus was the noise. He was the chaos. He was the bill for every moment of grace she had ever tried to carve out for herself. "There is no our life anymore, Marcus," she said, her eyes finally meeting his. She let him see it. Not the fear he expected, but the vast, cold emptiness where her love for him used to be. It was a crater, and it unnerved him. "I am not going anywhere with you." His grip tightened, a reflexive response to his loss of control. His knuckles were white. "You think you can just throw away 2 years? I made you. Before me, you were just another nurse. I gave you status. I gave you a life people would kill for." The lie was so audacious, so complete, that for a moment it almost broke through her calm. She thought of the research papers she had co-authored that he had published under his name alone. She thought of the intricate diagnoses she had suggested, which he had presented as his own moments of brilliance in morbidity and mortality conferences. She thought of the home she had made, the entertaining she had done, the emotional labor she had expended to sand down his rough edges and present him to the world as a polished, viable man. He hadn't made her, he had strip-mined her. A young nurse, Sarah, peeked out from the nurse's station, her face pale with worry. Ilara gave a minuscule shake of her head. Do not get involved. He would only turn his rage on the girl, and Ilara could not bear that. She could bear her own portion, but not that. It was then that a new sound entered the tableau. It was not a loud sound. It was the quiet, solid click of expensive leather shoes on linoleum, the sound of intention, the sound of mass moving without hurry. A man had stepped out of the stairwell door at the far end of the hall. He was tall, dressed not in scrubs or a white coat, but in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the harsh fluorescent light and soften it. He was not walking quickly. He did not rush. He was not performing. He was simply moving from one point to another, and the corridor, with its drama and its tension, was in his way. Marcus, consumed by his own theater, did not notice him. He was too busy leaning in for the kill. You will get your things and you will get in the car, or I swear to God, Ilara. The man in the suit stopped. He was perhaps 15 feet away. He stood with a stillness that was utterly magnetic. It was not a passive stillness. It was the stillness of a mountain, of something so grounded in its own power it had no need for motion. Conversations down the hall, which had been conducted in hushed, nervous whispers, simply ceased. The air changed. The atmospheric pressure in the corridor seemed to increase, growing heavy, thick. All eyes, which had been studiously avoiding the confrontation between Ilara and Marcus, now slid to the man in the suit. He looked at Marcus's hand on Ilara's arm. His gaze was not hot with anger. It was cool, analytical, like a geologist examining a flaw in a piece of rock. He did not look at Marcus's face. He looked only at the hand. Marcus finally felt the shift. He felt the weight of all those eyes turning from him to a point behind him. He glanced over his shoulder, his irritation plain. "Can I help you?" he snapped, the words of a man who believed he owned any space he occupied. The man in the suit did not answer Marcus. His eyes, a deep, quiet gray, lifted from the offending hand and met Ilara's. For the first time all night, she felt seen. Not as a possession, not as a problem, but as a person. There was a flicker of something in his expression, a deep, knowing sorrow that was startling in its intimacy. It was the look of a man arriving at the end of a long and difficult journey. "You are Nurse Vance," he said. His voice was low and steady. It was not a question. It was a confirmation. A voice like iron wrapped in silk. It cut through the tension, clean and absolute. Ilara could only nod, her throat suddenly tight. The man's gaze then moved, finally, to Marcus. It was a slow, deliberate motion. He took in the expensive watch, the arrogant posture, the faint sheen of sweat on Marcus's upper lip. "My father just passed away." "In room 412, the man said, his voice retaining that same unnerving calm. "He told me that if anything were to happen, I should find the woman with the kindest hands in the hospital. He said she hummed old songs. He said her name was Ilara." The world tilted on its axis. Mr. Thorne. This was his son. The son who had been stuck in traffic. The son for whom she had stayed. Marcus, completely misreading the situation, saw only an interruption. "That's very sad," he said, his tone dismissive. "But as you can see, we're in the middle of something. This is a private matter." The man, Julian Thorne, took one step forward. It was not a threatening move, but it changed the geometry of the hallway entirely. He was now the center of it. "Taking your hand off of her arm is also a private matter," he said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a quiet rumble of granite. "I suggest you make it one." The command was so quiet, so devoid of threat, that it was more terrifying than any shout. It was a statement of inevitable outcome. Marcus, for the first time, seemed to register the sheer, unadorned authority radiating from the man. He saw the cut of the suit, the quiet confidence that was not performed but innate. He saw structural power. deep and quiet, and it confused him because his own power was so hollow and loud. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Marcus blustered, but his grip on Alara's arm had loosened, the conviction bleeding out of it. "I'm the man who is about to own this hospital," Julian Thorne said, the words delivered with no inflection at all. They were a simple statement of fact, like saying the sky was blue or that water was wet. "And you have 3 seconds to let her go before I have security escort you out of the building and terminate your surgical privileges. Permanently." The color drained from Marcus's face. The hand on Alara's arm flew off as if it had been burned. He stared at Julian Thorne, his mouth slightly agape, the gears of his arrogant mind grinding to a halt as they tried to process this new, impossible reality. He was a god in this hospital, a celebrated surgeon. People did not speak to him this way. Julian did not wait for the 3 seconds to elapse. He simply looked past Marcus to the 2 security guards who had materialized at the end of the hall, moving with a fluid efficiency that spoke of long practice. They had not been summoned. They had simply been there, waiting for a signal that had been given before a word was ever spoken. "This man is leaving," Julian said to them, his gaze still locked on Marcus. Marcus sputtered, trying to reassemble his shattered dominance. "You can't. She's my fiancée. This is a misunderstanding." Alara finally spoke, her voice clear and strong in the sudden, vast silence. "I am not his fiancée." The words hung in the air, a final, definitive severing. Julian Thorne gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the guards. They moved forward, their presence large and implacable. They did not touch Marcus. They simply flanked him, their proximity a promise. Marcus looked from them to Julian, to the watching faces of his colleagues, and finally to Alara. He saw no support, no fear, no opening. He saw only the end of his authority. Defeated, humiliated, he turned and walked, flanked by the guards, his swagger gone, replaced by the rigid posture of a man who had been publicly dismantled. The corridor was silent for a long moment after he was gone. The nurses and orderlies slowly, discreetly, returned to their duties, the scene over. Alara stood, untethered, the place on her arm where Marcus had gripped her pulsing with a phantom heat. She felt strangely light, as if a great weight had been surgically removed. Julian Thorne did not move closer. He gave her space. He simply stood, a quiet sentinel in the fluorescent glare. "Are you all right, Nurse Vance?" he asked. Yes," she managed. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "My father was a good judge of character," he said, his gray eyes holding hers. "He was in your care for 3 weeks. In that time, he spoke more about you than he did about his own illness. He said you were the only one who saw a person instead of a patient." He paused. "I owed him a debt, and by extension, I owe you one." "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. "I was just doing my job." "Some people do their jobs," he replied, a hint of warmth finally entering his voice. "Others fulfill a calling. My father believed you were in the latter category. I'm inclined to agree with him." He looked down the now empty corridor. "That man. He will not bother you again." It was another statement of fact, not a promise, not a threat, an outcome that had already been set in motion. She believed him. The sheer, quiet certainty of him was more reassuring than any shouted vow of protection. "My car is downstairs," he said. "Let me take you home. It's the least I can do." She thought about her small, empty apartment, the one she'd fled to. The lock on the door felt flimsy now, Marcus's rage a palpable thing that could surely tear through it. She looked at the man before her, a stranger who had appeared out of nowhere like a figure from a myth. He was offering a shield. She was so tired of fighting alone. "Okay," she said, the single word feeling like the first step into a new and unknown country. "Okay." He led her not to the main elevators but back to the stairwell. It opened into a private service corridor she had never known existed. It was clean, quiet, and led directly to a reserved parking garage beneath the hospital. A sleek black car, so dark it seemed to drink the light, sat waiting. A driver stood by the open rear door. The efficiency of it all was disorienting. He had not just arrived, he had planned his arrival. The inside of the car was a cocoon of silence and soft leather. The city, lashed by rain, became a silent film playing outside the tinted windows. The storm that had delayed him now seemed to be washing the world clean. "Where do you live, Nurse Vance?" he asked, his voice a calm presence in the quiet car. She gave him the address of her small apartment, the temporary sanctuary that no longer felt safe. He simply nodded and relayed it to the driver in a low murmur. They drove in a comfortable silence. It was not the angry, weaponized silence she knew from Marcus. This was a different kind of silence. The kind that doesn't echo. The kind that settles. It was a silence that made room for her to breathe. She rested her head against the cool glass of the window, the exhaustion of the day, the week, the last 2 years, finally crashing down on her. "Elara," he said, using her first name for the first time. It sounded different in his mouth. Not a name to be commanded, but a name to be respected. "You don't have to go back there tonight. He knows where you live." She hadn't wanted to admit it to herself, but he was right. The thought of walking into that apartment, of checking the locks, of jumping at every creak of the floorboards was unbearable. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said, the admission costing her a piece of her pride. "Yes, you do," he said simply. He spoke to his driver again, a new address, a street name she didn't recognize. "Where are we going?" she asked, a flicker of her old wariness returning. "To a property my family keeps in the city, a small guest house. It's empty. It's secure. No one will know you are there. You can stay as long as you need." He looked at her, his expression serious. "My father valued 2 things above all else: integrity and safety. He believed you embodied the first. It is my responsibility to provide you with the second." It was an offer of protection so total, so seamless, that it was terrifying. She had spent so long being self-reliant, building walls to protect a space that was constantly being invaded. The idea of simply walking through an open gate into a safe harbor was disorienting. It felt like a trap because in her experience, every kindness from a powerful man came with a hidden price tag. But looking at him, at his calm, steady gaze, she saw no guile. He was not looking at her with desire or avarice. He was looking at her with a profound, almost solemn respect. He was fulfilling his father's last wish. He was balancing a ledger. The car pulled through a set of high, wrought-iron gates that opened silently as they approached. A long, pebbled driveway curved through a garden shrouded in mist and rain. At the end of it was not a guest house as she had imagined, a small cottage, but a beautifully modern structure of glass and stone nestled among ancient trees. It was a jewel box of a house, elegant and private. An older woman was waiting at the door, holding an umbrella. She had the same quiet gray eyes as Julian, his mother. She smiled at Elara, a warm, genuine expression that reached her eyes. "Welcome, my dear," she said, her voice like soft, worn velvet. Julian called. "We've been expecting you. You must be Elara." Eleanor Thorne did not ask for explanations. She did not pry. She simply took Elara's hand, her touch gentle and warm, and led her inside. The house was filled with light and art. It was warm and smelled of old books and beeswax. A fire crackled in a large stone fireplace. "You will stay here," Eleanor said, her tone gentle but firm. "Everything you need is here. Rest. No one will bother you." She looked at her son. "I'll handle things from here, Julian." It was a dismissal, but a fond one. The quiet transfer of care from one capable Thorne to another. Julian nodded. He looked at Elara one last time. "Sleep well, Elara," he said. And then he was gone, the sound of his car a distant whisper on the wet gravel. Elara stood in the warm, beautiful house, a stranger taken in from the storm. Eleanor led her to a bedroom that looked out over the rain-swept garden. The bed was turned down. A tray with a teapot and a cup sat on a small table. On the chair, laid out neatly, were a set of soft silk pajamas and a cashmere robe. The level of foresight was staggering. "Thank you," Ilara whispered, the words feeling wholly inadequate. "Nonsense," Eleanor said, patting her hand. "My husband knew people. He knew their measure. He told me you were a woman of grace and substance. He was right." She smiled again. "The world can be a loud, brutish place for women like us. Sometimes we just need a quiet room to catch our breath." With that, she left, closing the door softly behind her. Ilara stood alone in the quiet room. She touched the silk of the pajamas. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the window. A woman she barely recognized. Exhausted, yes. Frightened, a little. But for the first time in a very long time, she felt the unmistakable, disorienting, and deeply profound sensation of being completely and utterly safe. She did not cry. The relief was too deep for tears. It was a slow exhale she felt she had been holding in for 2 years. She drank the tea, changed her clothes, and slipped into the clean, cool sheets of the bed. She was asleep before the storm outside had passed. The next few days passed in a dreamlike calm. Ilara slept. She read books from the overflowing shelves. She walked in the walled garden when the rain stopped, the air smelling of wet earth and roses. Eleanor Thorne was a quiet, unobtrusive presence. She would appear with trays of food, sit and talk for a while about art or literature or her late husband's love for bad puns, and then disappear again, leaving Ilara to her solitude. They never spoke of Marcus. They never spoke of what had happened in the hospital corridor. It was as if that part of her life was a book that had been quietly closed and placed on a very high shelf. Julian did not visit. He called once, his voice calm and steady over the phone. He did not ask how she was feeling. He simply stated facts. "A restraining order has been filed and granted. His possessions have been moved out of your former apartment and put into storage. The lease has been terminated. Your personal items are being packed by a bonded service and will be delivered wherever you wish. You are not to worry about any of it." "How?" she asked, stunned by the speed, the totality of his actions. "I have a capable team," he said, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. His power was not personal, it was structural. He was the CEO of Thorne Industries, a global logistics and technology firm. He moved systems, not just people. He had looked at her problem not as a domestic dispute, but as a logistical failure, and he had corrected it with the same dispassionate efficiency he would apply to a broken supply chain. "Thank you, Julian," she said. "It's handled," he replied. It was his version of, "You're welcome." A week after she arrived at the guest house, a package was delivered for her. It was a large, flat portfolio. Inside were architectural blueprints and design renderings. It was her thesis project from nursing school, the one she had stayed up nights perfecting. A design for a new kind of community clinic, one that integrated holistic care with traditional medicine, built around a central garden to promote healing. Marcus had called it a childish fantasy. He had mocked her for it, told her to stick to her charts and her patients. She had hidden it away, ashamed. There was a note with it, on heavy cream cardstock with Julian's name embossed at the top. It was short. "My father kept a copy of this. He was immensely proud of it. He said it was the future of healthcare. I agree. Let's build it." JT. She sank into a chair, the blueprints spread across her lap. He wanted to build her clinic, not as a gift, not as a favor, but as a viable project. He had seen the work. He had recognized its value. It was a form of validation so profound it left her breathless. Marcus had tried to shrink her world, to convince her that her only value lay in her proximity to him. Julian was showing her a blueprint of her own mind and telling her it was worthy of being built in steel and glass. She began to work. For the first time in years, she felt the spark of her own ambition, the hum of her own intellect, waking from a long, enforced hibernation. She spent her days at the large oak desk in the guest house's study, refining the plans, drafting budgets, researching zoning laws. She would send her notes to Julian's office via a secure courier, and his team would send back data, market analysis, potential site locations. They were working together, though they were miles apart. It was a partnership built on competence and mutual respect. Meanwhile, Marcus Dane was discovering the true nature of structural power. He arrived at the hospital one morning to find his keycard no longer worked. His name was gone from the surgical rotation board. His privileges, as Julian had promised, had been terminated. The hospital board, which had been in negotiations for a capital infusion, had suddenly accepted a massive, transformative grant from the Thorne Philanthropic Foundation. The grant came with certain conditions. One of them was a new Ethics and Conduct Review Board. Marcus was its first and only subject. He tried to fight back. He hired a lawyer. He filed a lawsuit against the hospital for wrongful termination and against Alara for defamation and breach of contract, citing their engagement. He was convinced it was all a bluff. He believed the world operated on noise and bluster, and he was very, very good at both. He told his lawyer, "Give her 3 days without me, without her job. She'll be begging to come back. This Thorne fellow will get bored and move on." He could not have been more wrong. He was playing checkers while Julian Thorne was playing a game that spanned continents and industries. The lawsuit was met with a quiet, overwhelming response. Julian's legal team, a phalanx of the most feared corporate litigators in the country, filed a countersuit. They detailed with chilling precision every instance of professional misconduct, every research paper he had plagiarized, every junior colleague he had harassed. They had affidavits. They had emails. They had a mountain of evidence that had been gathered with silent, terrifying speed. His bank called. His credit lines were frozen. The mortgage on his downtown condo was suddenly under review. The luxury car he leased was recalled due to a discrepancy in his financing application. His entire life, which he had believed to be built on his own merit, was revealed to be a house of cards, and someone was calmly, methodically, removing them one by one. He was being erased. Alara knew nothing of this. Julian shielded her from it completely. Her world was the guest house, the garden, and the blueprints for her clinic. One evening, Julian came to dinner. It was the first time she had seen him in person in over a month. He arrived, as always, without hurry, dressed in a simple dark sweater and trousers. He looked different without the armor of his suit, younger, more approachable. They ate the simple meal Eleanor had left for them, sitting at a small table that looked out onto the darkening garden. "The first phase of funding for the clinic has been approved by the Foundation's board," he said, as if commenting on the weather. "We've secured a site downtown, the old textile warehouse district." She stared at him, a piece of bread halfway to her mouth. "Already?" "It was the best location," he said. "Good transport links, underserved community. It matched your project parameters perfectly." "You're really doing this," she whispered. I thought it was just an idea." "I don't waste time on just ideas, Alara," he said, his gray eyes serious. "Your plan is sound. The financials are viable. The mission is essential. It's a good investment." He was framing it in the language of business, giving her the dignity of being a partner, not a charity case. He was giving her power back, piece by piece. "I don't know how to thank you, Julian." "Build it," he said simply. "Build it well. That will be thanks enough." He paused, then added, "My mother says you have a real smile now, one that reaches your eyes. She says she hadn't seen it until this week." The observation was so personal, so intimate, it made her blush. He saw her. He and his mother were seeing the person she was becoming, emerging from the wreckage of her past. The relationship between them developed in these quiet moments. It was a slow, respectful courtship built not on passion, but on recognition. He would come to the guest house to review her progress, and they would end up talking for hours. She learned about his childhood, his brilliant but emotionally distant father, the immense weight of the legacy he carried. He learned about her dreams of changing the healthcare system from the inside out, her love for old movies, her quiet, wry sense of humor. She found herself relaxing in his presence, uncoiling a part of herself she had kept clenched tight for years. With him, she did not have to perform. She did not have to manage his moods or anticipate his needs. She could simply be. It was a revolutionary feeling. He was the safest place she had ever known. He never touched her. Not once. He kept a respectful distance, his hands always in his pockets or resting on the table. The space between them was charged not with tension, but with a deep and unspoken understanding. He was waiting. He was giving her time to heal, to find her own footing, to become the person she was meant to be before she had met Marcus. He was not a rescuer swooping in to save a damsel. He was a cultivator providing the right soil and light for a rare plant to finally bloom. The final act of Marcus's self-destruction came, as most such acts do, from a place of pure, undiluted arrogance. Thorn Industries was hosting its annual Obsidian Gala, the city's most exclusive and high-profile charity event. It was a night where billions of dollars were pledged, where careers were made and broken, where the city's power brokers gathered under one roof. It was the absolute center of Julian Thorne's universe. Ilara had not wanted to go. She had no dress, no desire to be on display. But Julian had insisted gently. "The clinic will be officially announced tonight," he had told her. "You are the architect of it. You need to be there to receive the credit." He was not asking her to be his date. He was asking her to attend as a professional, as the head of a new, groundbreaking project. He was placing her at the center of the narrative. A dress arrived the afternoon of the gala. It was not ostentatious. It was an architecturally precise gown of deep emerald silk that fell in a clean, unbroken line to the floor. It was elegant, powerful, and understated. It was a dress that said its wearer was to be taken seriously. It was a dress he had chosen for her, and it was perfect. When she came down the stairs, Julian was waiting in the foyer. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes beyond respect and admiration. She saw a deep, unguarded warmth that made her heart skip a beat. "Ilara," he said, his voice a low murmur. "You look correct." It was the highest compliment he could give. Not beautiful, not stunning, correct. As if she had found her proper place in the world, and it suited her. The gala was a glittering sea of power and wealth. The ballroom was vast, its ceiling a constellation of crystal chandeliers. Ilara felt a tremor of her old anxiety, the feeling of being an imposter. But Julian's hand rested lightly on the small of her back, a small, grounding point of contact in the overwhelming space. He did not steer her, he simply supported her. He introduced her to titans of industry, to politicians, to philanthropists, and he did not introduce her as his companion. He introduced her as Ilara Vance, the visionary director of the Thorn Community Health Initiative. He would then step back and allow her to speak about her project. And she did. She spoke with a passion and intelligence that had been dormant for years, her voice clear and confident as she outlined her vision. People listened. They were captivated. They saw what Julian saw, a brilliant, capable woman. It was during a brief lull as they stood near the grand terrace overlooking the city that the disturbance occurred. A commotion at the main entrance. Raised voices, the smooth, seamless flow of the party faltered. And then he was there. Marcus. He had somehow bluffed or bribed his way past the outer layers of security. He looked wild, his suit was rumpled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was radiating an aura of pure desperation. He scanned the crowd, his eyes landing on Ilara with a terrifying, predatory focus. He started moving towards them, pushing through the glittering crowd, which parted before him in a wave of distaste and alarm. Julian did not move. He simply turned slightly, placing himself between Ilara and the approaching disaster. His hand left her back. His posture did not change, but he seemed to grow larger, his presence becoming an immovable object. "Ilara!" Marcus shouted, his voice raw. "We need to talk. You can't do this. You have an obligation to me." The entire ballroom fell silent. The music from the orchestra faltered and died. Every eye was on them. Marcus reached them, his face a mask of rage and entitlement. He ignored Julian completely, his focus entirely on Ilara. "You think you can hide behind him? You think you can steal my life and just walk away? I own you. We had a life together. You owe me." Ilara stood behind the unmovable shield of Julian's body. She felt a flicker of the old fear, the instinct to shrink, to placate. But then she looked at Julian's calm profile, and she felt the solid ground of her new life beneath her feet. She was not that woman anymore. Julian finally turned his head, his gaze falling on Marcus with a kind of weary disinterest. "You seem to be confused, Dr. Dane," he said, his voice perfectly audible in the cathedral-like silence. "You no longer have a life to be stolen." "You think you can scare me with your money?" Marcus spat, jabbing a finger at Julian's chest. "I'm a surgeon. I save lives. You just move boxes around." Julian did not flinch. He simply reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once and held it up for Marcus to see. It displayed a series of corporate ownership documents. "You are, or were, a surgeon at St. Jude's General Hospital," Julian said, his voice a calm, precise scalpel. "As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, the Thorne Foundation completed its acquisition of the hospital's parent company, Med Equity Holdings. So, in effect, I am your employer, or rather your former employer." He swiped the screen. "This is the deed to your condominium building. My real estate division acquired it last Tuesday. As your new landlord, I've reviewed your financial situation and have been forced to begin eviction proceedings." He swiped again. "This is the portfolio for the private bank that holds all your loans and credit lines, a bank my family has held a controlling interest in for 50 years. Your assets have been frozen pending a fraud investigation into your stated income, the one you inflated using Ms. Vance's work." He put the phone away. He looked at the utterly broken man in front of him. Marcus's face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. His mouth hung open. He was trembling. "You don't own anything, Dr. Dane," Julian concluded, his voice soft with a terrible finality. "You are not a surgeon. You are not a homeowner. You are not a man of means. You are an unemployed, indebted man trespassing at a private event. You have nothing. You are nothing." The carefully constructed edifice of Marcus Dane's life crumbled to dust in the space of 30 seconds. The arrogance, the confidence, the swagger, it all evaporated, revealing the small, terrified man beneath. He looked at Julian, then at Ilara, his eyes pleading. He was searching for a handhold in his freefall, but there was nothing there. He made a choked, sobbing sound and dropped to his knees. Right there, on the marble floor of the grand ballroom, in front of the most powerful people in the city, the great Dr. Marcus Dane fell apart. He knelt and wept, not with remorse, but with the agony of a narcissist who has been shown his own reflection in a shattered mirror. Julian looked down at him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a subtle signal. The security team, which had been hovering at the edges of the room, moved in. They were quiet, professional. They lifted the sobbing Marcus to his feet and escorted him out, his wails echoing briefly before being cut off by the closing doors. The silence that remained was profound. Julian turned back to the crowd, his composure absolute. "My apologies for the interruption," he said, his voice calm and carrying. "Theatrics are so rarely productive." He then turned to Ilara, took her hand, and led her to the small stage where the orchestra had been playing. He picked up a microphone. "Tonight," he began, his voice resonating through the ballroom, "we intended to announce a new initiative, a project that we at the Thorne Foundation believe will redefine community healthcare in this city and eventually the country." He turned and looked at Ilara, his gray eyes full of a fierce, quiet pride. He kept her hand firmly in his. "For too long, the person responsible for the most brilliant ideas in a room is not the person who gets the credit. That ends tonight." He faced the audience again. "I would like to introduce you to the architect and founding director of the Thorne Community Health Initiative, a woman whose brilliance is matched only by her compassion, a woman who, for the past several months, has been the most capable person in every room I have been in. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Ilara Vance." He let go of her hand and started to applaud. The entire ballroom, after a stunned second, erupted in a thunderous ovation. The applause washed over her, a wave of validation so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. She looked out at the sea of faces, and they were not looking at a victim or a scorned woman. They were looking at a leader, a visionary. They were looking at her, Ilara Vance, for exactly who she was. She stepped to the microphone, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with a wild, soaring joy. She looked at Julian, who stood just behind her, a quiet, solid presence. He gave her a small, encouraging nod. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Later that night, they stood on the private terrace of the guest house. The city sprawled below them, a tapestry of glittering lights. The air was cool and clean. Ilara was still wearing the emerald gown, but she had taken off her shoes. She held a glass of champagne, though she had not touched it. "He's gone," Julian said. It was not a question. He accepted a plea deal. He'll be in a minimum security facility for 18 months for fraud. After that, he has nothing to come back to. All of his accounts have been settled. His debts are paid. He has a zero balance, in every sense. "You didn't have to ruin him," she said softly. It wasn't an accusation. It was just an observation. "Yes, I did," he replied, his voice firm. "Men like him don't learn. They are not corrected. They are contained. I did not ruin him. I simply presented him with an accurate accounting of his life. The ruin was his own work." He turned to face her. "I did it to ensure he could never cast a shadow on you again. Your future is too bright to be lived in anyone's shadow." She finally looked at him, truly looked at him, at the quiet strength in his face, the unwavering integrity in his eyes. He had not just saved her, he had cleared a path for her. He had seen her, and he had made sure the rest of the world saw her too. "My father," Julian said, his voice softer now. He made his fortune in logistics, in seeing how things connect. He believed the most important connection was between a person's potential and their opportunity. He said you had limitless potential. I just provided the opportunity. "It was more than that, Julian," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You provided sanctuary." He stepped closer, the space between them finally shrinking to nothing. He gently took the champagne flute from her hand and set it aside. Then, for the first time, he touched her. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin with an infinite tenderness. His touch was not proprietary. It was a question, a quiet offering. "Ilara," he said, his voice a low whisper. "I don't leave because things become complicated. I stay. I have been staying." She leaned into his touch, a silent answer to his unspoken question. Her long, quiet endurance was over. The need for it was gone. In its place was a new feeling. Not the fiery chaos of passion she had mistaken for love with Marcus, but something deeper, stronger, the warm, steady peace of finding safety. The profound rightness of being with a person who saw her not as an asset to be owned, but as a sovereign nation to be respected. He lowered his head and kissed her. The kiss was like him. It was not rushed. It was not demanding. It was quiet and deep and sure. It was a promise of a future built not on obligation, but on partnership. A family built from honesty, complication, and the daily deliberate choice to stay. As she kissed him back, she felt the last of the tension she had carried for years finally melt away. She was not a survivor anymore. She was home. The kind of silence that settled between them now was not empty. It was full. It was the sound of a new beginning written in the stars of the city lights below. A quiet sovereign and his underestimated queen, standing together at the start of their empire of kindness. She had held a dying man's hand, and in doing so, had found the man who would hold hers for the rest of her life.